Welcome back to the McCall's Quilting Parisian Grace Quilt-Along. I'm Laura Roberts and I'm your hostess for this wonderful event. And I'm here to show you how to make your A blocks. So get your fabric out. When you're ready to do this, take a look at the list of things, take a look at what you're going to be making and look at what you're going to need. You can figure that out. If you're making 8 flying geese, you'd need 16 2.5-inch squares. So just take a look at your fabrics and look at what we're going to be making and bring your fabrics over to your machine. So the first thing we're going to do, you need to make diagonal lines on the back of your cream dot squares, both the 2.5-inch ones and the 2 7/8-inch ones. It's really simple. All I'm doing, it doesn't make any straight edge. I'm not using the numbers on the ruler at all. I'm just using there. I'm just putting that there to one corner and then over to the other corner, so that the ruler goes right through those corners, and then I'm using a mechanical pencil to just draw lines like that. That's all you need. Now if you're looking closely, you'll see that this didn't go through the corner. Oops, no problem. You go back and you do it again, knowing that when you're sewing, you're going to want the line that goes right through the corner, like that. It's really easy to do. It happens a lot where you kind of get a little bit crooked right at the bottom. No problem. So here are my squares all ready to go. So now I'm going to take you over to the machine and we're going to make the first part of this lovely thing. Alrighty. Let me move my pin cushion. This is my happy little pin cushion. It just kind of makes me smile. It's a Fons and Porter pin cushion that I saw and thought I had to have. I'm just going to move that over here. And of course I need my glasses. Didn't used to need glasses, I do now. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to grab one of my squares and I'm just going to put it here on top of the tan red print 2.5 by 4.5-inch rectangle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to align the edges like that, all the way around, and make sure that your line is going the same way as the diagram shows the line going. And then when I start sewing, I always grab, I have a stack of these little scraps of fabric, and I put that under the presser foot. And so when I start sewing, those thread tails and the little, you get that little knot on the underside right at the beginning of a seam, that's going to catch all that. And so when I get to sewing my pieces together, it'll be all nice and clean. So one of the things that's really cool about this quilt is you can do a lot of chain piecing. Chain piecing is where you sew the same thing without taking what you've just sewn out of the machine. You just keep going using the same movement over and over and over again. And it makes things really fast and easy, and you just keep doing the same repetitive things, so it's less likely that you'll make a mistake. All right, so I'm just going to get started here and check this out. My foot puts down the presser foot. That cool? I don't have to do it back here. All right. Oh, I love this machine. Okay, and just so you know, I'm using blue thread so you can see it better. If I had used cream, you wouldn't be able to see what I'm doing. All right, so I'm just going to feed that in like that, right on that line, like that. There we go. And I'm just going to sew. Do you see how that pencil line is going right down the middle of the foot? Right there, like that. Okay, now I'm not going to bother with picking up the presser foot and all that now. I'm going to grab 2 more of the same pieces, and I'm just going to do what I did before. I line them up like that. Okay, making sure they're aligned on all sides. And I'm just going to go right behind that one I just did, like this. There we go. Just make sure I get right on that line. Okay. And there we go, right on through. Okay, so now I'm going to just take these out. And you would do this, you could do this with all the ones that are in these blocks. You can just go ahead and do them all. And you can see here, when I cut them apart, you can see what that looks like. Okay, the next step is to cut off the extra amount of fabric. We've got the seam allowance here. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take my big scissors and I'm just going to kind of guesstimate that 1/4 inch, like that. And I'll do the same thing here, like this. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to iron these open. Okay, just press these guys open, move those out of the way. Okie doke. And I like to just use either, something like a starch or a starch alternative when I get to this point, because these are actually seams that have been sewn on the bias. If you don't know what bias is, I'm going to show you. When you have fabric, fabric has grain, and a grain means that there's some the fabric that you have the lengthwise threads and the crosswise threads. And the lengthwise threads, you can tell which ones they are by whether or not you have any give. Now, do you see when I pull on that, how it moves? That means it's the crosswise grain. Because if I turn it this way, the lengthwise grain won't move at all. Absolutely will not move. But the bias moves a whole bunch. So the reason I put some starch here is because I want this fabric to be pretty rigid when I go to press it open, because I don't want it to get skewed when I'm pressing. So I'm just going to give that a little squirt. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the seam first, which means I'm just pressing it straight down before I open it, like that, just like that. And what that does is it kind of, I think it melts the thread down in. It brings your stitches right down into your fabric. Okay, so I've got that, like that, and I'm just going to press this open, like that. There we go. Isn't that pretty? Love these fabrics. These are those Moda fabrics. The Le Marais, my French general. Le Marais is, the name comes from a district in Paris that's known for being utterly elegant, and it's where the aristocracy lived, and it's just incredibly beautiful and lovely, and I love the name, Le Marais. Okay, so I've got this pressed open. I'm going to take these back to the machine. Ready? And put my glasses back on. Okay, I'm going to put my little thread guide back underneath here. Okay, there we go. Like that. And just the magic of I love the foot pedal, putting the presser foot down. Okay, so here's one of my pieces that I just sewed. And I'm going to turn it the other way and grab one of my squares. Okay, I have another square. And I'm going to do just what I did last time, but this time I'm going to put it the other direction. And if you look at your diagram, you'll see that that's what it shows. Okay, so the same thing, I'm going to line that up with all three edges like that. You can pin if you want to. I tend not to pin on something like this because I am notorious for sewing over pins, which you don't want to do. You know why you don't want to sew over pins? Because if you sew over a pin, a needle can break. And needles, when they break, can actually fly. And they can go into your eyes, they can go anywhere. You really don't want to sew over a pin, but I do way too often. So, okay, I've got that all ready to go. And I'm going to do just what I did last time. I'm going to just go on up here, and I'm just going to lift that a little bit. There we go, because I want to get right on that line. All right, and I'm just going to stitch right down that line, just like that, just like I did last time. And right off the corner. And again, chain piecing, I put the piece up like that, and I put this one on it, and I'm going to do exactly what I just did, like that. Okay, up and down. And it saves time because I'm not cutting between every step, and it's really great because if you are someone who tends to put things, the wrong way, well, as long as you get the first one right, and you just keep copying what you did the first time, they're going to turn out fine. Okay, I'm going to take these guys out and just snip them off here. And then I'm going to get my big scissors. And here we go. Same thing I did last time. I'm just kind of guesstimating that 1/4 inch. All right. Now, you can see because of the blue thread, you can really see what I've been doing. At home, you're not going to use blue thread. With this quilt, I recommend maybe a beige thread. When you get into, there are going to be times when you're sewing red to brown, and then probably a red or rust thread would be better. But for this part, I would use a cream or a tan. And I'm going to do just what I did last time. I'm going to set the seam. Isn't that weird? You know, for the longest time I thought setting the seam was, you know, kind of silly, and what does that mean? And, you know, why would anyone do that? It seems kind of pointless. And then I started doing it and realizing that things turned out a whole lot better, which is why I do it now. Okay, so I'm just same thing, I'm gonna open that up. Now when you're pressing like this, it's really easy to not get it opened all the way. If you don't open your seams all the way, what happens is your pieces are too small. So when you go to put them together with the next one, something's not right, it doesn't really fit. Well, make sure that you really get that open. Okay, like that. And one time when it's really good to look at is when you get that done, just kind of take a peek, bring it up to your eyes and look. If you have a bunch of fabric that hasn't been turned over, now see, that's all been turned over, but if you find that you have fabric stuck in there that didn't get all the way turned over, and these are both fine, you're gonna wanna go back and press it again, okay? So these are flying geese, and I have two of them here that are beige, and well, this is the cream and that's the tan, and here's the other one you're gonna be making. You're gonna be making this one. It's the rust print with the cream dot, and when you sew two of these together, you're going to end up with a unit that looks like that, okay? I'm going to show you how to sew those together. So what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to bring them just like that. You just bring that one, the top one, like that. You just bend it right over the other one, right sides together. I'm going to go back to the machine, put my glasses back on, and grab a pin. And what I want you to see is that when you're pinning this together, you are going to be pinning in such a way that you're really aligning those edges. And if you sew with this side up, you can see right here, you see that? That's the point of your triangle. You want to sew just about through where those threads meet, okay? So I'm going to align this guy, just like I did the others, only bigger. Okay, I've got that corner aligned. Now these I pin. I find it just so much easier to get them just the way I want by putting a pin through them. And I'm not going to put a pin through that point. If I put a pin through that point, what's going to happen is that it's going to be a real mess. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put a pin to either side, making sure that I have that corner lined up. If you find when you get to this point that it doesn't really line up, that something's short along, just kind of work it a little bit. Just kind of ease that in because it will be fine by the time you open it and press it. Obviously, if you're 1/4 of an inch off, well, that's not going to work so well. But if you've just got a little to ease in, like a 1/16 of an inch, it's because you've got bias going on. So I've got a couple pins in there, and I'm just going to grab my little thread dude. I don't know, what should we call those? Little thread catchers. I don't know. I'm sure that someone has come up with a really cute name for them, but I don't know what it is. Okay, and I'm just going to sew that 1/4 inch seam by aligning this with my 1/4 inch foot. This is a 1/4 inch foot. It's going to show right here between where the needle comes down and the edge of the foot is exactly 1/4 inch. So I want the edge of my rectangle to go right along the edge, just where it's not sticking out from under the edge, just right aligned with it. Just like that. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch my 1/4 inch seam. And remember what I said? Got to take that pin out. Okay. And I'm just going to be very careful to make sure I sew as close to that as I can. It's a little bumpy because it's got all that seam allowance in it. So here's something that I really think is helpful. I use an awl, or, you know, there are things out there, there's something called a purple thing. Some people use a chopstick. I use an awl, and I just hold that flat so I don't get that big bump that's going to move the seam and have it not end up where I want it to be. And I got over that little lump. Okay, I'm going to keep sewing, grab my pin. And then here's another time when I use the awl. Sometimes you'll probably know this already. When the fabric goes through the very end, it can just kind of move to the left or the right, and then it doesn't come off of that 1/4 inch. So this is something else I use my awl for. Now you could try to put your finger in there, but you know, I'm just not that brave. Maybe brave's not the right word. Okay, so there we go. Oops. And I'm going to just trim off my little thread guy. I'm going to take it back over to the iron. All right, here's the magic. Okay, ready? Dun, da, da, da. Isn't that pretty? Don't you love this? Ah, I love them. And I'm going to press this way. I'm going to press the seam allowance up. And the reason I'm going to do that, if you're trying to figure out which way to press something, you can look, of course, to the next unit. You know, this guy has to go next to someone else. And if that needs to be pressed a certain way, they need to be opposite. So they'll butt up against each other. But here, I'm pressing it that way because this right here where you had all that seam crossing, that if I bring it down here, you're going to double its thickness. Now that is happening, it's doubling its thickness over here. It doesn't matter if over here when that folds onto itself because this is going to be in your seam allowance. And so it's not going to be a kind of a bump in the middle of a unit. So I'm just going to press it that way, like that. And then I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to press it again from the front because I want to make sure I've got that really open. Okay. At this point you can still do a little starch because it just makes a nice fine finish, and it kind of acts not like glue exactly, but just kind of gets it in the right place and keeps it there. All right, so there is one of my units all set and ready to go. These are the corner units. Okay, so now what do? We have the corner units done, but we're going to be making these. These are the units on the side. So I'm going to show you how to make those. You have 2 7/8 inch squares cut out of both the cream dot and that tan red print. So I have already drawn a line on that one, and I'm just going to put it right on top, like that. Right sides together. I'm going to take it over to the machine. Here we go. Hello, glasses. I'm just going to get my little thread catcher in there. All right, get her started. Now, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be sewing 1/4 inch to the side of that line. So the way to do that is to move the line over even with the 1/4 inch foot, because then it'll be sewing right along there. All right, so I've got them really well aligned, and I'm just going to start sewing, feeding that line right along. It's like not outside the edges, just right under the very edge, like that. Okay, and I'm just going to let it go. There we go. Okie doke, there's one. And I'm going to use the same one again. Just do the same thing. Okie doke. Again, chain piecing, and I'm going to keep that pencil mark right at the edge of the machine, at the edge of the 1/4 inch foot. Just like that, and just sew on down. Okie doke. And then I'm going to grab them and bring them over here and cut. Now I'll cut off my little thread tail guy. Okay, and I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side of the line. Okay, like that. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to put it this way this time and do just the same thing. Whoops, right along the edge. There we go. And repeat with this guy, and you just do these with all the ones you need to do all at once. Okay, there they go. Okie doke. So there we go. These are half square triangles, or pieced squares, or triangle squares. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I come over here. And all I'm going to do is cut them apart right down on that line. So I'm just going to cut down. It doesn't have to be precise. You just kind of have to get down the middle there. Don't worry if you didn't cut right on the line. As long as you're not cutting really close to the stitching, you're good. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing I did before, which is I'm just going to give them a quick little spritz and set the seam like that, and then open them up. I'm going to press these so that the seam allowance is underneath the tan, underneath the darker one, okay? The easiest way for me to do that is I put the tan on top like that, and then I just press open like that. And when I press away from myself like this, the seam allowance goes right underneath the tan side of the square, like that. Okay, oops, this guy, will put him over here. There's lots of room. Okay, remember when I was talking about how you want that seam allowance to be pressed open really well, or, you know, when you've sewn? One way you can check it, when you are getting to this point, you have, you know, dog ears. They're called, I know other people call them different things. I call them dog ears. And what you're going to do, what I think really keeps things cleaner, is you snip those off even with the little bit above. All right, even with that edge, just snip them off. When you're snipping them off, you can tell if it's not really open, because if you have one, let's see if I can find one, that isn't really open. Well, if you do have one that isn't really open, let's push this guy back a little bit. You're going to find that when you look at it, it's sometimes right there, that line isn't going to be right to the point, and you're looking at it closely. So you want to make sure it's all the way open, and then you just trim away. And I trim off my little dog ears. Snip with my fabric scissors. There you go. Okay, and when you have them all trimmed, you'll have 4 of them for each little side unit. Okay, and you're going to arrange them so they look like this. So they look like the one in the diagram, okay? And what that means is I'm just going to line them up like this, okay? And make sure that it looks like it's supposed to. Okay, and then I'm going to sew this to this and this to this. So I'm going to show you about this one first. I'm just going to take this over to the machine. And you'll see that when I put these together, those seam allowances nest, which means that this seam allowance is going that way, that seam allowance is going that way. So when you put them together, you can feel them kind of bump up against each other. They make this, really snug little fit. All right, just like that. Okay, and then I'm going to check again. If I open this up, is that going to be the right way? Look at it that way. Yep, that's right. Okay, remember, this is the advantage to chain piecing. You make sure you get them all the same way. Okay, and then my little thread guy. Okay, lining up with that 1/4 inch foot. Okay, there we go. And you see how this is a little skewed? I'm going to use my awl to just bring it over there, and I'll hold it like that. And then I'll do the same thing with the other one. And then I sew them together to make that unit. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew those now, and I'll be right back, show you what they look like. Alrighty, I have them sewn and I pressed them open. So here they are, and they look just the same. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go like that. I'm going to put them, oops, so they're kind of face to face like that. And what I've done is when I pressed the seam allowances on that last little part, I pressed it toward the tan, like that. They're both pressed toward tan, and that means that I can do that butting up thing. I'm just going to put a pin in there in the center, and I can just feel how they're, you can feel them snug up. You can feel them nest. Okay, and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam along here. Okay, come on, little guy. Here we go. And get that pin out of there. Cannot be trusted. Okay. Okay, just keep going like that. And I'm using the awl to hold it right under there, like that. Okie doke. All right, there we go. And then I'm going to come over here, and when I press it open, you'll see that it matches this guy. See that? We have 2 that match. Okay, so the next thing is to arrange them so that they're ready to sew together into the block. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. I've already done some of the rows. You'll take a look here. I've done the center row, and I've done the bottom row. The center row, this unit is just like these. It's just instead of using the tan and red print with the cream dot, here's the tan and red print with the rust print. Okay, so those guys are going to be like that. And then I have the ones I just did, and we're making sure I have them oriented just the right way, like that. Okay, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to sew these together to make that to that and that to that. I want to show you how that seam goes together. So we'll take this one over to the machine and move my iron just a tad so I don't run into it. And I've aligned them the way they need to be, like that. And I'm not going to use a pin this time. I don't think I really need one because I'm not trying to match something in the middle. All right, just sew right down here. There we go. And make sure that this is going to match right down here, that those ends go together. And again, if you see that place, oops, where the threads cross, that's the place you want to sew on, because that's going to make your point pretty. So I'm going to just make sure those are aligned, just like that. I'm going to sew on down here. I get to this point, and I'm going to use that awl to flatten it, just like that. Okay, because that just keeps it under control. And then I'm going to sew down the rest of it, making sure that that point, that those corners match, just like that. All right. Oops. Okay, and that's how you do the seams when you're joining those units. And when you open it up, you'll see it looks just like that. And see how my points are just where I want them to be? Isn't that pretty? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and sew the next one, and I'll be right back to show you how you sew your rows together. Alrighty, this is the row that I just sewed, and of course I need to press those seam allowances. I'm going to show you something that gives you a choice. If I turn over the 2 rows I've already done, you're going to see I press those seam allowances differently. On the bottom row, I press the seam allowances out. But in this middle row, I press the seam allowances open. And there's a reason I did that. If you turn this one over, you'll see that this is where you have 8 little triangles meeting together. And I find that if I press that to the side, no matter which side I go to, it gets really thick, and then that part kind of lifts, and I don't want that to happen. And it lays nice and flat when I press it open. Okay, so this one, I'm going to do just like I did the bottom one. I'm going to press them out. So I'll press this out, just like I did in that other row. Okay, there we go. Oops. All right. And sometimes you might want to press from the front too. Just make sure you have that all the way open, like that. Now I have a recommendation. I do not use any kind of steam at all when I'm piecing. I have an absolutely dry iron because the steam can make it wet, and then things will skew. And unlike the starch, which when you iron it dries up and becomes actually less likely to skew, water, the steam is, I think it's not a good idea. So when I'm actually pressing during piecing, I use a dry iron. Okay, so now I need to sew this seam and this seam. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the same thing where you fold it over like that. And as I come along here, I'm going to align the seams. I'm going to throw a couple pins in there. And so I'm just going to take this over to the machine and show you what I'm talking about. All right. Okay, there's my little thread tail guy. Okay, glasses are a good thing around here. All right, okay, so right here, you can see that I have this seam here that I want to align with the one that was pressed open. So I'm just going to make sure that's what I've done. Okay, by working that like that till I see that it's lined up by looking at the top like that. And then I'll throw a pin in. And I'm going to do the same thing here, like that. And pin. And then in the center, these are both pressed open because I pressed open that unit. And do you see right here, you've got these 4 little seam allowances, and you just want to feel them. You can feel when they're the way they're supposed to be, because nothing is thicker than anything else. Okay, I'm just going to finish up the same way, just pinning right along. At home, you might pin a little more slowly than I'm pinning because you want to make sure that your points are the way you want them to be. Alrighty, here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to sew this. And you see how that is not going up to the corner? No problem. I'm just going to ease it in to fit it. Okay, that's probably just means that it didn't get pressed completely open. But when we get it all together and press it again, it'll be fine. Okay, so here we go. Get started here. Okay, pin's coming out. And I'm just going to go right along like this. Again, I use my awl to hold those seam allowances where I want them to be, so I don't get some kind of a big knot, or where it gets caught up. Away with the pin. Okay. The little noise you hear is when the machine is going over my great big pile of seam allowance. Ah, see, I almost did it. I almost sewed over a pin. Along there, make sure those edges are aligned. There we go. Pull that down. Pull out that pin. Do you ever talk to yourself when you sew? Sometimes I do. Well, actually, a lot of the time I do. Oops. I get going too fast here when I'm trying to get over those little lumps, don't I? There we go. Just like that. Pin. Okay. We're just going to do this guy, get that over there. Okay. And there you have it. Last one coming out. That pin. Let's just make sure I've got that the way I want it before I take the pin out. Okay. And right on through the end. All right. And there we have it. Okie doke. And there it is. All right. So I'm just going to take this one over, sew this next seam so you can see what it looks like, and then we're going to go ahead and add our little border strips. I'll be right back. All right, I have my block all sewn together except for the frame. And remember those things that we fussy cut those strips? Well, I'm going to sew these on next. I'm just going to sew the shorter ones to the sides and the longer ones to the top and the bottom, and I'll have this lovely framed block. The other one you're going to be doing, you'll be using these strips for your second A block. Look like that. Now the blocks are the same except for those framing strips. You ready? Just like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. I want to show you how to sew one strip on and what you need to be looking for. So we'll just go ahead and grab a strip, take it over to the machine. Alrighty. Okay, what I want to do, I'm going to sew with the strip underneath because I want to be coming through everywhere where those little threads cross to make sure that I'm not hurting my points. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my glasses on. And I'm not really worried about pinning here because it's just one long strip and I'm not having to try to get, you know, a seam allowance from each side kind of getting along. But you certainly can. Okay, there we go. I'll just get that all lined up just the way I want it. Alrighty, and I'm going to go ahead, 1/4 inch seam allowance again, like that. And what I do is once it's in the machine, I just bring everything down to the end, make sure everything's going to be working just fine. Okay, and I'm going to sew along, again, trying to make sure that I go right through where those threads come. This isn't a place where I would need to because we don't have a point there. All right, I'm making sure, see how I just pulled that out so I can make sure that my strip is right where it's supposed to be. And again, this is going to go right through those points. You can use the awl to make sure things are lining up the way you want them to. Okay. Like that, or to keep those little edges down. Okay, I'm just going to bring this guy over a little bit to line them up. There we go. Okay. Again, I've got that little bump right there. I'm just going to push that down like that so it cooperates. Okay, and finish it up. Okey-doke. And I'll press that open and you'll see, isn't that pretty? And here are the points. My points are just where I want them to be. And I'm going to press this, and then I'm going to add the other side so you can see what it looks like all done. And here we go. The first block is done of your beautiful quilt. And as you can see, the way that we cut those strips, the sort of special cutting, you can see it has this wonderful flow where everything just comes in and points to the center of the block. And then I'll just make another one and add these strips for the border, and I'll have both my A blocks done. So I hope you do your homework. Your homework is to make both of your A blocks, one with that border and one with this border. And I hope you enjoyed watching the magic of the fabric. It just, oh, it goes together so beautifully. Alrighty, so I hope you do your homework and get your 2 A blocks done. And if you don't have a kit yet, just go to mccallsquilting.com/quiltalong. You can get it there and play with the same beautiful fabrics I've been playing with. And I will see you back here next time.